Good morning, everybody. I never know what I'm going to say until I get up, on the grounds that I feel that if I ever write a speech, it will just die on me. So I hope that it will be vaguely interesting. It will be a rant lasting somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes. If it goes well, it will seem as if it made sense. If it didn't, well, who cares? You know. It's really interesting that we always talk about doing things for our children and our children's children, all that sort of nonsense. And I'm very minded over the sentence, what sort of planet are we leaving our children, being exactly the wrong question. And that's why we go wrong. The answer should be, what sort of children are we leaving our planet? And I mean that quite seriously, because I've got so bored going to conferences about the environment and hearing predominantly middle-aged men wittering on about how we're bloody well doomed, and also implying somehow as if the world is one of iterative small changes that lead up to something big. It's not. The world is not like that. It's just like when I talk about my life, I always talk about it backwards. And of course, we cannot cope with the fact that our lives are in reality chaos. Therefore, we describe our lives as having had a reasonable trajectory to get us to here, as opposed to, it was mad, I don't know how I got here. And that is actually how it is. How many people in this room actually saw coming over the horizon the video cassette, the CD? You didn't. How many people imagined computers in their living room? You didn't. Nobody, other than a very few people, believed that the invention of what they called a smartphone, who will use that, would actually become an enslaver of all our consciousness. 2007 is when it came out, and every one of these iterations is more and more explosive, more and more changing, and quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. So when I see the British government talking about banning diesel cars by 2040, you realize the dreadful malaise we are in. I don't actually believe that we'll be making combustion engines much past 2023 in any significant quantities anywhere in the world. I believe you should all be investing, if you've got any money, in properties next to the roughest roads in the world, the noisiest, fumiest roads, because very soon they'll be almost silent and there will be no fumes. Beware in 2023 for the financial collapse, which is going to bring everything down around your ears. But you're not even thinking about that yet, are you? You're thinking about a small iterative change, a little initiative. And we're going to do things which are called centers of excellence, and we're going to do leading edge, cutting edge, bleeding edge talking. And we're going to even think the unfucking thinkable, aren't we? Always, we've got another initiative on the horizon. And what I wanted to say to you today is about what happens in crowds. In 1972, I was at the Ahoy in Amsterdam watching a very big rock concert with 10,000 people, and 12 Hells Angels terrified 10,000 people. They terrified them, because no one knew, if I stepped forward, will everybody else step forward? So part of the issue is getting a constituency of people that will step forward. And part of what I find exciting in life is, how do you build constituencies of people that will step forward? And the most valuable people aren't the children. That is sappy, saccharine nonsense. Really, it's pathetic. The people who change the world are usually over 50, who feel their best has gone. Find me someone who's totally miserable with a really good midlife crisis, who is basically contemplating the end of their life and nothing much to put on the tombstone. That's how Eden was built. The two horticultural directors of Eden said they couldn't possibly come out of retirement. I should get someone younger. And I said, if I can find the money to send you business class to a conference somewhere exotic, and you're still standing in the bar at midnight, and you know you're smart, will you take the job? They said, yeah, but that won't ever happen. Well, I knew it would. I sent them off, first of all, to Cape Town, and then they went to the Azores. And they were still talking about the amount they put back. And they took the job. And they said, we've got nothing to lose. Let's really go for our shots. Then they hired some youngsters, and they hired youngsters because they knew that the youngsters didn't know it couldn't be done. So they asked them to do all this stuff, and it kind of happened. Because what they wanted was an adventure. What most people want is an adventure. Most people, I can't speak for ladies, but most men I know carry inside them the seed of a sadness that they don't have an adventure on the horizon. So if you can create that seed of an adventure, a moment where we're going to add up to bigger than the sum of our parts, you watch people suddenly become a bit more waggy-tailed. They do. They do. And then you need to learn the greatest art of all. People often say to me, Tim, you're such a visionary. And I go, oh yeah? Is there anybody in this room who, aged 12, did not imagine building a huge dam or a Mad Ludwig castle or a Rapunzel tower? That's what we do. We're an imaginative creature, aren't we? Human beings. Homo sap, so wise we named ourselves it twice. Okay? What you need to do is not to be visionary in that sense. You need to do something that's really visionary. And you know what I did that was visionary? I persuaded myself that it was possible to take 300 people professionally hardened to only use the word no, to get them to say yes. And the secret was the Beatles. Where's this going, you're saying? Where's this going? No. You see, the greatest weakness in most people is when you say to them, do you want to be like the guy at Decca Records who turned down the Beatles? How are you going to face your grandchildren? Yeah. And it's really interesting. Once you start painting a picture of what could be and the legacy, and it looks bigger than the risk, you have a chance. And risk is so funny. Most of the people who are risk averse are people who've never taken risks. It's kind of weird. It's a bit like being scared of dogs never having met one, isn't it? I always take risks, and I've discovered something really, really strange about taking big risks. When you take a really big risk, the moment you've decided to take that risk, the risk is halved because you're not using any time up worrying about the anticipation of taking the risk. You've now taken the risk. And then there's another thing which I think most people don't honestly know about, which is the fact that even people who dislike you intensely, if it looks like the risk you've taken is going to end up with you crashing and burning, they will often come up and help. And you know why? Because there is something in the soul of Homo sap, which means even if you're not a risk taker yourself, you still, in the dark quietude of your own living room, hope that one day you will be able to say boo to a goose. Therefore, the death of a risk is a little death for all of us. Anyway, I digress, don't I? Last year, I was invited to climb the biggest tree in the world. And it was at this moment I discovered something really weird, that I was more scared of being thought a coward than I was of my own death. Because my son said, come on, you've got to come. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And I said, that's what I'm worried about. So anyway, I found myself in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California, in this private grove of 500 acres. And we came across this place called the Waterfall tree. And I climbed it. Well, I lie, actually. I was dragged up it by two much younger men. But I want to tell you about this because it was very important to me. This tree, let me not exaggerate, its girth was from me to that door, that big. You're saying he's lying. No, it was that big. Anyway, I'm being dragged up this tree on a string about this wide. Do you know how you climb a big tree? With a bow and arrow, you do it. You get some fishing line, you go zoop over the top branch, it comes down, you tie a rope, you pull it over the branch, you go over another, and you bring that, then you tie it like this, and then you go junk, 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 up you go. It sounds easy if you do it really fast like that. Now, imagine you're at 300 feet, and you look to the right, and you see green forever. It is Sequoia National Park. And then just 180 degrees that way, and you see Death Valley. It's biblical. Then you find yourself stroking the bark of this tree, and the bark of a giant sequoia, when you get up that high, becomes like the neck feathers on a hawk. Very, very soft, very gentle, beautifully formed. And you sit there, your heart rate is down to about 3,000, because just don't look down, okay? And you're holding it. And then you start to think, and you realize this tree is 4,500 years old. Think about that for a moment. 4,500 years old. That living, magnificent thing has, to my knowledge, I'm an archaeologist by training, but has, to my knowledge, outlasted 37 human major civilizations. 37 civilizations that had a beginning, a zenith, and a collapse. It had outlived. Now think for a moment. Each one of those civilizations will have had people like us in it, won't it? There will have been some smart people, we hope, in each one of those civilizations. And in each of those civilizations, the establishment screwed it up. Think about it. Because the moment you start to think about that, you go, oh my God, I myself, in this civilization that we're living in now, I too am suffering from wanting to be part of that establishment, obeying the rules of that establishment. And they're taking us to the roads to ruins. We're about to become number 38, maybe. That should teach you about the nature of rebellion and the things that you're thinking in your head that you've been keeping to yourself, the angers you have that you think it'd be inappropriate to express because we want to fit in. We are all in that crowd at the Ahoy in Rotterdam, in Amsterdam, aren't we? We're all there. We know that there's something out of control going on. We know that to be too hysterical means you're not really a sensible person. You're not academic enough. Be reasonable. Be reasonable. What for? Who are you trying to impress? It's great, isn't it, on your deathbed? I was reasonable. I studied the outside wing flap of a fruit fly, and that was my university study. It was really relevant, I'll tell you. Yeah. That whole university nonsense, I do apologize, I'm looking only straight forward because I don't want to get shot. But the over-respect, the overweening, craven respect we give to the universities. Oh my word. Those thieves who've stolen the birthright of the blue-collar engineers who created the Industrial Revolution. But now you cannot find a politician who doesn't think no one got fired for investing even more in universities to study even more fragmented things, which will just hasten our way to become number 38. Don't get me wrong, I partner with a lot of universities, and I say it to their faces. And I say it to their faces because I'm trying to slap them with a wet haddock to say, research some cool stuff, guys, and don't be so slow. You're so slow. Anyway, the reason I rant about this is I read possibly the best book I've ever read called Pandemonium. Many of you may have read it in this audience, by Humphrey Jennings. And Humphrey Jennings was writing a history of the Industrial Revolution, and he realized it was not possible to write the history of the Industrial Revolution in his own words now, for exactly the same reason that I cannot tell you the truthful story of my background, or nor can you, because you will lie, because you can't believe it was so shambolic. And this book is an utter masterpiece. It is a collage of correspondence between people between the between the years 1660 and 1886. He hardly says a thing. It's just lots of bits of correspondence between people. And you read this book and you get this extraordinary thing. There's old Isaac Newton. You know, as far as I was concerned, if I was writing the history of the world, marvelous fellow, discovered gravity, or rather described it. But when you read his correspondence, that was a minor thing to him. He was more interested in what was it that made that bioluminescence, that fluorescence on the back of a black beetle that you catch in the light, that green, emerald green. What was it? How was it done? And boy, his essays on sound. Is sound something inherent in us, or is it to do with frictions between things? What you're looking at is a broiling, emerging of an intelligence and a curiosity about life, which is utterly breathtaking. And yet, from the distance of 300 years, we see it as like a greatest hits album. And nobody sensible ever buys greatest hits albums, do they? Because they're always rather dull. You need the tracks in the middle. What the book says right at the end is about the colonization of knowledge, and how the colonization of knowledge, the dividing of the whole world into a series of silos, is actually what is going to kill us. Because what happens is, with your isms and ologies, is that they become so distinct, so separated, that you don't see the whole anymore. Up until 1870, what we now call science was called natural philosophy. Darwin was a natural philosopher, Lyell, Huxley, they're all natural philosophers. And they saw interest in all things. So if I was to say to you, what one thing, if we had just one chance to change something, as opposed to we've got a million initiatives, What might it be in terms of education? I happen to think that by making it compulsory that we should all study natural philosophy, natural history, you could not, but by the time you were 18, be aware of our interconnectedness, that everything is interconnected. And why would I do that now? I would do that now because, as you look at the world, it's a very strange world. We see on the surface a lot of alienation, isolation, loud right-wingness, and whatever. And we were talking at dinner last night about the fact that a tree right at the moment before it dies will flower the most. When you look across the world today, I see an old form of society dying. I see the death throes of a chauvinistic approach to nations. I believe that we're about to enter a period over the next 30 years where nations will not matter so much. But it has to come after a period where suddenly it mattered so much. Trump, Brexit, all of that stuff, Hungary, don't worry about it. We're going somewhere else. And the thing that's really interesting about the somewhere else is in 1969, I remember being very moved by the notion that we were all Stardust. It was all hippie shit with the age of Aquarius, you know, all that stuff. Isn't it odd now that the world of science has actually caught up? That the world of science has revealed the absolute majesty of the biological forces inside us, the bacteriological world inside us. And the world of science over the last 18 months has been linking that too with the absolutely breathtaking part understanding of what's going on in the soil, which is intimately related to exactly what's going on in our invisible world. We're living, ladies and gentlemen, at a time when I can possibly believe that a spiritual awareness with a small s, that we are all creatures, that we are all part of this earth tapestry, is being revealed by the world of science catching up with a kind of spiritual consciousness of maybe 50, 60 years ago. How exciting is that most of the people in this room are going to live through a complete revolution in terms of awareness. The obligation for all of us is somehow, how can we look at that and dare to use that language and not feel as if it's slightly embarrassing and you've had too much to drink? Do you know what I mean? How can one rejoice in the joy of poetry, the cultural making visible of the fact that this revolution is coming? Because the irony, of course, with science and STEM and all the rest of it is this kind of this mindset in our heads about culture being over here and the world of science and observation being over here. And it's a tragedy, an utter tragedy, because the arts and sciences have the same root. It's like the wishbone of a chicken. They all start with observation. But actually, the ultimate thing is, do we want to celebrate being alive? Do we want to talk about existence? Or do we want to talk about joyfulness and beauty? I've just come back from Shanghai, where Eden is building 3 projects. And it is very odd to go to a country that's reinventing itself. Do you know that in 2015, 2016, 2017, each of those 3 years, they planted more trees in China than the rest of the world all put together? Their president lectures at agricultural colleges. Yes, they have them over there. And you know how he starts each one of his speeches? I can't do it in Chinese, but it is, heal the soil, and we will heal our souls. You talk to Chinese people in business of your age, and they are electrified. They know they trash the environment, but they are rising to this challenge. They believe now it is the age of new Taoism. It is a spiritual age in which they're going to show that they can conquer the damage that they made. The Eden projects that we are working on are big. The cheapest of them is 150 million, and the most expensive is double that. But what they want above all else is a story of the possibility of redemption, as opposed to the certainty of doom and gloom. And they are investing eye-watering sums of money. And they want to be friends with us. They love the English-speaking world. And they feel slightly pushed away. So I would urge anybody in this room who wants to work with China, it's a great time to work with China. So, the projects that Eden is working on, I need to say just a couple of things. The Eden project is big. It is big. It is, well, it's 34 acres in a hole, 120 acres on the top, and it cost about £144 million. What a stupid investment. What idiot invests 144 million in a business that only turns over 26 million? You with me? It is crazy. You don't do that, do you? Do you want to know how much money we've made for Cornwall? 2.1 billion. Pound for pound, we're probably the best investment Britain has ever made in anything in particular. Why is it such a good investment? I'm telling you this because I think you sometimes need to get above and think, if we do something really big, it might actually work. The problem is accountants. Accountants are the devil's spawn. No, they are. I mean, I say this, my partner is an accountant, and we have conversations about this issue. The problem with most accountants is that they're marvelous at adding up the cost of things, but they don't understand the cost of not doing things. So if I spend 144 billion and I get 2.1 billion and counting coming back, and what it's done is it's lifted the feeling of bereavement from a whole geographical area, because what happens is people believe things can't be done. You see it in the deadened eyes of the people who live in certain geographies. Good luck is a stranger here. Marvelous things won't happen. Our young folk will need to go over there to make their livelihoods. Just think of the freighting of that sadness on the soul. It's a terrible thing for parents to think that actually all they've worked for, their kids are going to have to go somewhere else, and the land that the kids actually love being on, they're not going to come back there until they themselves retire. How miserable is that? And it's very strange that when you make this investment and cool things happen, like we put on really big rock concerts at Eden, and suddenly people think, wow, the big acts in the world are coming to Cornwall. Maybe it's cool. And then people say really nice things, and then someone opens a restaurant over here, another one there, another one there, another one there. And then you ask the question, is Cornwall closed because no one comes, or does no one come because Cornwall was closed? Let's stay open. And then the public come, and they come, and they come. We now have 5 million people coming to Cornwall. And then the bastards, then they say, oh yes, but you're only creating tourism, low-paid jobs. These are all the people who've never created a job for anybody. You know, the snidey bastards. Do you have them in Ireland? I can't believe you have them in Ireland. A language as musical as yours doesn't allow for snidey bastards. You need to have an edgy accent. Look, I know this stuff. I'm by birth Dutch, and the Dutch for I love you is ik hou van jou. The fact that we bred is a miracle. I mean, what an ugly way of saying I love you. But the point I'm making is that sometimes the sheer theatre, the sheer grand theatre of saying now is a moment in history, let's all get together and do something fantastic, is what's needed. The Eden effect, as it is called, is very weird because it isn't all down to us. It's simply that the pall of low expectation suddenly started to clear, and people who had some money came back to Cornwall and invested in things. Yeah, okay, originally it was kind of like Ponzi stuff, you know, a bit of an art gallery, lots of restaurants, some bijou hotels, and a lot of rented cottages and whatever. The Falmouth University then went from being an international art college to being a university. Exeter's campus grew. Suddenly the kids discovered surfing. It's the coolest bloody culture of any university in Britain. They're always surfing. They're not doing any studying, but they're surfing, and there's this culture developing where the kids are staying. There are now a huge amount of high-tech businesses in Cornwall, and their survival is extraordinary in terms of the time. And so many people I know in London are wanting to move down. And you'll find it here in Ireland. It's a very weird thing. I've got a friend who's developing rural areas all across Britain, and he's making a fortune. He bought John O'Groats, you know, top of Scotland, and he's persuaded the Duke of Argyll to give him all his property. He says, you guys are just squatters, you aristocracy. Let me make you some money and let me really liberate the countryside. He builds post offices, builds shops, builds schools. And you know what he does then? He, at his own investment, puts in super, super fast broadband. And amazingly, all these people drip out of the cities and they want to be in the country. Because the thing that they thought needed to enslave them in the city is gone. They can come to the country. The other really enslaving word is farm. Farm is a really funny word, because farm is farm goes with farmers, and farmers go with sort of stock and, you know, having farm, right? But If you didn't have farms but had hubs that happened to be in rural areas, you'd suddenly think, my God, what a health opportunity we have here. We're working on a very big project in China where they want to get people back onto the land. And actually looking at farms as the centers for mental health recuperation is a huge thing. Statistic of the day. How many mentally ill people do you think there are in China by their admission that actually register it? 200 million. You want to know how many disabled there are? 89 million. That's bigger than the population of Germany. But these guys are looking at the country in a completely new way. They see the countryside as being symbolic of a healing process. They see it as healing centers. And I think in Britain, I hope in Ireland, we can actually create a revolutionary way of looking at the countryside where the economy of the farm becomes actually the economy of the hub in the countryside. But that needs big thinking. It needs big help financially. But when you work out how many people are in need of such health, and when people talk about the growth economy, we all know, everybody in this room, you wouldn't be here if you didn't know that it's a miasma. It won't be there. There's no growth economy in terms of products. It's going to be the emotion economy, the emotional experience economy that is going to be the only area for growth. And that is the area in which all of us are engaged. Therefore, we need to find some amazing stages on which to create that sort of health focus. One of the projects that Mike and I are working on is in Derry. I got kidnapped. I went to Derry when it was the city of culture, and this guy said, would I like to come and see something? And the next thing I knew, he'd driven me across Derry and he'd taken me into this derelict building on the side of the river Foyle, underneath the big bridge, you know, the big bridge where everybody seems to jump off. And he said, we want to restore this, and you've done such a good job at Helligan, we thought that you might do this. And I said, handily close, I said, to where I live. And anyway, his passion was so great, and I suddenly looked at this thing. It must be one of the most beautiful rivers in Europe, the River Foyle. And it's absolutely extraordinary. I don't know whether any of you ever walked through the middle of Derry. I don't think I've ever walked through a city where all of the smart houses don't look at the river. They look the opposite way. It's like someone is saying, here is one of the most beautiful rivers in the world with some of the most beautiful landscape, but it's doomed. It is a place where luck will not come. And then you look, you've got this derelict estate called Boom Hall. Next to it is a Protestant estate called Brook Hall. And next to it is a convent. As far as I was concerned, that was a marriage made in heaven. You know, Catholic council, Protestant landed estate, and the church. So we've got God and both sides. It's marvelous. And we talked to everybody, and they said, well, we can't all work together. Well, I can tell you that everybody's now signed up to working together. And we're finding the money to create something which has never been done before. We thought, wouldn't it be amazing to create 7 miles of beautiful designed footpaths through a landscape that effectively becomes like the Wild Olympic Games? Working with universities so that the place, just imagine you're in a park and no one knows that the park is there for a very specific reason to actually measure the work that you do. We will need your help as we do this. But almost everybody we talk to abroad says, wow, we'd like to be part of that. Because one of the problems that we have, I'm quoting Mike now, so you're in trouble if you're wrong. One of the problems we have is that much of the evidence which is emerging about health and being outside and being amongst trees and whatever is still a little bit vacuous. It needs a bit more muscle. So if we can start to create places where you can genuinely measure these remediative, is that the right word? We'll have to do remediative forces, it's going to be very, very powerful. So we've got 3 enormous walled gardens where we're going to grow marvelousness. The biggest walled garden I've ever seen anywhere in the world is 8-acre walled garden. Amazing paths, wonderful trees. A stately home and a stable block that's derelict. We want to build the best playground. Have you noticed, if anybody's been to Derry, the people of Derry have no idea how often it rains. It is so traumatic, they believe it only rains for about 40 days. It doesn't. It rains damn near 200 days a year. So we're building a covered space where we can do create education programs with exercise. And I hope part of the product of coming here is that we can encourage a broad constituency of people to come together to make something marvelous. I see my job as the creating of canvases, not having the ideas. It's the creating of canvases on which people can really strut their stuff. We're working all over the world. I told you we're doing 3 projects in China for the reasons that I hope will become obvious from what I said earlier about China. We're building a project in Australia, a very big project in a mine in Australia. We're doing the centerpiece for Expo 2020 in Dubai, the Sustainability Pavilion. Don't be put off. The word sustainability ought to be banned, because every time you hear it, you hear a sort of waggy, fingered Old Testament prophets and the smell of muesli and patchouli oil, don't you? But actually, it's a really cool place. And it's a playground. And people are outraged by it. And it's just marvelous that they're outraged by it. Because you see, I want to end by explaining why I'm so rude. I'm not actually rude. I just believe that my job is to tickle people into thinking stuff. The other day I was at a terribly important conference in London. I can't tell you how important it was. It was so important you could hardly breathe. And this chap came up to me and he said to Tim, will you join the Earth Council? And I went, what's the Earth Council? And he said, well, it's like the elders. It's people who feel the soil and most of it. I was already feeling a bit queasy this time. And I started into him and I said, you know what? No. And I said, because it will achieve nothing. And he looked really horrid about it. He said, how can you say that? We're not beyond hope. And I said, we are beyond hope as long as there are people like you wanting to create things called Earth Councils with the same guilty parties who've been preaching at people about how we're going to hell in a handcart. And all that's going to happen is going to be another bunch of bores telling us about planetary boundaries and what we've got to do. And I said, what do you know about Kim Kardashian? And he went, what? I said, have you ever watched EastEnders? Do you ever read the Sun newspaper? What do you think of David Beckham? He said, you're joking, of course. I said, no. I said, the trouble is that people like you are such snots, you don't realize how 3/4 of the world operates. So you create a language where you speak to each other in lifts, and you go to conferences, and you talk crap to each other, and you then wonder why you're not changing the world. Go to the Natural History Museum, go to any bloody museum and watch scientists at play. We are going to do education to you. This is photosynthesis. It's a picture of a leaf and the arrows, and this is the phloem and the xylem and the rest of it. Unless you've understood the wider world, it means nothing to you. We've tested it at Eden. We've tested it. We've allowed scientists to play, and we've watched them collapse in tears. Why will they not have education done to them? We did a big commission where we asked scientists and artists to compete on the one thing botanic gardens should be saying, and not one of them had until we did. Without plants, there's no life, not as we know it, on Earth. Just a good starting proposition, I thought. And we said, the public will decide how they'd like to get this message. It was tragic. The scientists with their drawings and things and white bits and stuff and equipment behind glass. And then the winner, a mum and a dad made of wood with a son and a dog and a cat and a breakfast scene and Elvis's wooden heart playing in the background. And one by one, the things made from plants disappeared from the breakfast scene until eventually mum and dad turned round and their clothes dropped off and they were naked and everybody giggled. And then the spotlight goes on to the cat. And the cat is lapping at some milk, which drains out of its bowl. Suddenly it goes, whoo, its eyes pop out and it falls over dead. Everybody calls it dead cat. Nobody forgets that without plants, there's no life on Earth. That is the key thing. We've got to work out, we've got to go to where people are, not go to where we think people should be. And that's the problem. The problem's us, not them. Get into a bit of Kim Kardashian. Get down with the kids. I'm only half joking. I mean, I'm not really joking at all. Because if we really want to create huge difference, we've got to make it cool to be with us, doing what we're doing. And we've got to find a language that makes people go, hey, Lewis Hamilton, you're talking about nutrition, are you, Liz? He's a vegan, by the way. And if you talk to Lewis Hamilton, he is amazed that we don't do more about nutrition. Because, to be honest, our bodies are so amazing. They make a Ferrari look like a rust bucket. And yet we never tell that story about how beautiful and fantastic and sensational our bodies are and how we could give it fantastic fuel. Just imagine, I mean, if your life depended on it, you know what you'd do? Eat this stuff, it'll make you good at sex. Win, isn't it? I mean, it's a win. So maybe that's where we ought to be going. And I noticed that have I overgone by 4 minutes, 31 seconds? I've got to go now, sorry. I was just enjoying, I felt suddenly, there was a moment just now when I was talking to you, and I felt I was in my own living room just talking to a bunch of mates. So thank you for listening to me. I hope I haven't irritated you, and I hope that gives us something to chew on about doing stuff together. So I hope the rest of the day goes really well. Thank you. Bye-bye.